On this week's episode, I talk with Jon Acuff about his new book, Finish, where he breaks the myths of goal setting. Really great book. We also talk about a really great idea of his view of push and pull as it's related to reaching our goals. I thought that was really smart. Something else that I thought was smart was a Venn diagram he gives us of the three things we should pay attention to as we are finding our place in the market. He also talks about accessibility and how it pertains to attracting a large audience, something that he's always been good at, in my opinion. We also talk about the current state of social media and blogging, something that's really important to all of us. And we also talk about the time that Jon tried out for the college football team. So as you can see, we talk about a lot. I really think you'll enjoy this episode. Here's our conversation. All right, today's guest is Jon Acuff. He's a consultant, blogger, public speaker, and the author of 6 books, including his latest book, Finish, which I really think is a book that we all need. Jon, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam.
Absolutely. And, I say that Finish is a book we all need because starting something, in my opinion, and it seems like you've maybe changed your opinion since writing Start, because starting something is much easier than finishing something. I will say that I love the book Start, and you dive into different age groups, and it's interesting, but it feels like a different voice and do-over in your newest Finish. But what's happened since writing Start that changed your perspective?
Yeah, I always tell authors, because people say, what should I write about? And a big thing is figuring out what people need help with and then finding your curiosity about that. If you're not curious, you're not going to write a good book. So I think you have to have that. But you have to know, too, especially from a nonfiction place, this is going to serve an audience. And so what happened was I wrote this book, Start, because I thought, starting is the hardest part. And I kind of bought into the myth we have where it's like the hardest part of any journey is the first step, or, well begun is half done. Right. And so people started coming up to me over the years and going, hey, no offense, I like to start, but I've never had a problem starting. Starting is the easiest thing in the world. How do I actually bring something to completion? And so I started to look at my own life. I started to look at the data. 92% of resolutions fail. I started to, really figure out, okay, the finish is the hardest part. And so that's what kind of kicked me off on that journey.
92% of resolutions fail. Wow, that's quite a statistic there.
Yeah, it's staggering.
Crazy. Yeah. And talking about Start to do-over to Finish, going back to stuff Christians like, back to the very beginning, I would say the humor is, of course, what makes you different in the business landscape, at least. But was there ever a point where maybe that uniqueness felt more like a hindrance than a strength? Did you embrace it and run with it? What was maybe that internal voice saying to you as you were figuring out your place in the business landscape?
Yeah, I think you're always figuring it out. But I never, I've had people say, we don't want a comedian. We need, real information. And I think I have to be smart and kind of frame what I do from the power of the idea. And it's delivered in a humorous way, but it's not straight comedy. So that's for certain. But no, I think people ask me that sometimes and they'll say, hey, do I have to be funny on stage? And I always say, no, you have to be as funny as you are at a dinner party. Right. So I think a big part of being an entrepreneur, being a leader, is figuring out what's unique to you and what's natural and then amplifying that. I think more than anything, it's your honesty that comes through. So if you're a really funny guy at the dinner table, great. If you're more of a ask lots of great questions, great, do that. I also saw that the landscape indicated I could do it in a way that other people weren't. There are a lot of brilliant speakers, a lot of brilliant authors, but they're not funny and they're not, they're serious and they're research driven. And so, you can say Jim Collins is amazing, but he has a dry sense of humor, but nobody walks away from a Jim Collins speech and goes, that dude was hilarious. Yeah. Like nobody's read Good to Great and been like, I just cried laughing.
Right.
Because that's just not his brand. And so I think a big part of it is figuring out what's natural, and also where is there a hole in the market? For me, humor was a hole. People always do the Venn diagram to try to figure stuff out. Mm-hmm. I think a great Venn diagram is, what do I enjoy? What's natural to me? What's missing in the marketplace? What do people need? And so, and then you find the center of that and go, okay, well, let me see what that looks like.
That's great advice. And I think that could be really helpful for those who are trying to find their place or their voice in their area of focus. But yeah, I mean, some of the funniest stories I've read in your books were in Finish. That one where you went out and kicked field goals for a for a college team. That was crazy, man.
Yeah,
That
I
was
mean,
great.
it was a great example of like how bad we are at figuring out goals.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it, is that we have crazy goals. So yeah, my goal in that story was to try to make the college football team, which if you've ever seen me online, no one ever is like, Jon Acuff is huge, you know?
I don't know.
So that was, yeah, that was
Yeah.
definitely a problem.
And we'll get more into the book in a bit, but something that I've noticed about you that's different, it might be the humor, might be that you've captured the entire journey. I mean, I've been following you for a long time. As you know, we've kind of been talking back and forth just online for years now. And I can remember maybe you tweeted out a photo. I can't remember if you were using Instagram back then, but you were in a stall changing for your day job after maybe a morning speaking gig. And it's even how you start out the book Quitter, which is another great book of yours. What do you think it is in your voice and your style in capturing the journey that makes people, at least from my own experience, like I barely know you just from online, but I want to help you, if that makes sense. Do you feel like people gravitate towards you? Is it just welcoming other people into your journey? Is it just that you're nice? Why do you think people gravitate towards you and want to help you?
I think part of it is that I'm accessible. You know, like I share the good things and the bad things. I think old school leadership was, if I share my weaknesses, they won't trust my strengths. And I think new school is, if I pretend I don't have weaknesses, they won't trust my strengths. And so I say like, hey, this thing blew up in my face and it wasn't good. And I regret it. Here's what happened. And so I think part of it is that I share the journey along the way, like you said, like the good and the bad. I think part of it is that I'm pretty accessible in that, like, I share like, hey, this is what my family's working on. Or, hey, for instance, somebody who's a parent might identify with me because I say, yeah, I thought my kid was going to get a cell phone at like 16 and that was ignorant and wrong. And here's why she got one before then. And you go, okay, well that, you know, or I might say, hey, I don't know enough about a certain issue. What's a book I should read? And then somebody will recommend one and I'll read it and go, oh, wow, I was really off on that. But there's plenty of people that I think are like, what do you know? Who are you? I'm like anybody else. There's plenty of people online that are not nice. And I think it just depends on how you handle it.
Yeah. I mean, what are you doing? So you say accessibility. Of course, that takes time. We're all getting busier. Are there any specific things you've put in place to guard your schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I almost automatically say no to any email that has the phrase "pick your brain" or the phrase "buy you a cup of coffee." Yeah. I don't, you know, I don't do a lot of individual mentoring. I mean, I do advice for friends, but that's not. I say no to a lot of speaking gigs. My price says no too. You know, there's a lot of people that go, I can't. That's not the fee we want to pay. You know, I have kids, and so kids in a great way tether you to their schedule.
Right.
So I don't get to do 200 speaking gigs a year and be a good dad. So automatically they help me say no, because I know I have these 5 things on the calendar, I need to do them. So I think it's a variety of things like that.
Talking about they don't allow you to do 200 speaking gigs a year. Of course, you speak a lot. You have your social media that you have huge following there. The goal in the beginning, like going back from then to now, you've had to have a lot of courage, and you speak about it a lot in your books. It came up in Finish, showing up to do the things you need to do that you ought to do. I think I know the answer to this question, but is fear something you've dealt with a lot along the way, and how do you deal with your fears?
I guess it depends. When people are like, how did you overcome fear? I think that's such a dumb question, because you don't.
Yeah.
I think it was Hemingway maybe that said, you're always afraid because with each success, you just make the next challenge bigger. So, you know, when you have a small blog and 10 people, like, you're afraid of offending 10 people. But when you have 1,000 people, then it's exponentially different. And so I think you always deal with fear. I think telling people what you're afraid of is a big help, because sometimes what you're afraid of is just ridiculous. Sometimes what you're afraid of, you should be afraid of, and they'll say, hey, that's scary. Let's figure out a solution. So I think community really matters. I think too, like, just doing it afraid. People have said that before, like the idea of, I'm not going to wait until I'm not scared. I'm just going to do it while I'm terrified. Like, that's okay. And I'm going to push through that. And so I think that's part of it, is that the only way to learn how to not be afraid of public speaking is to do public speaking a lot. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that's pretty indicative of a lot of life, where, like, The way to deal with the fear is to do the thing lots of times and realize you're still alive. And then, ultimately, for a lot of your listeners, the stuff we're talking about isn't life or death. If I don't write a good blog, if I don't do a good tweet, if I don't give an amazing speech, nobody died in that moment. So I think keeping perspective about, wow, this is different. There's joy in here regardless of how I do.
And it can feel like so many of those things. That's a good point, that we blow things out of proportion. It may feel super important in the moment, but we have to back away sometimes and realize, hey, in the grand scheme of things, this is not that important. So we've kind of covered going from the 9 to 5 to where you are now, but are there any practical takeaways from your own life, from people that you've talked to along the way, that might be useful for listeners who are trying to move from that 9 to 5 to becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of different steps, but I think a big part of it is having patience. I always tell people I don't like any plan that requires a miracle. So like when you tell me like, I'm going to do this thing and I go, well, how will it work? And you're like, you show me a plan where your book sells 1 million copies. That's a terrible plan. That's not going to work.
Right.
So and again, I'm a fan of miracles. Don't get me wrong, but it's not good to have them in your plan. And so I think patience, I think also going to experience the thing you're trying to jump to. And so like when somebody tells me I'm going to open a coffee shop, I automatically say, well, have you worked at one before? And if they say no, I say, go work at Starbucks at night for 6 months and learn everything. And if they don't want to do that, they're not going to do the dream anyway. So like going to experience it and then not putting all your bills on top of that dream. Like you've got to have some financial runway.
Yeah, it took you a while. Of course, someone like me who has followed you from the beginning saw that. How many years ago was that you sent out that picture in a stall and you were working at a day job?
2008. So nine years ago. Yeah, it's not, I'm sure there's other people that do it faster, but for me, it was the right pace. And I still think, you should not force it. I'm a big believer in what I call the difference between push and pull. And so when you push your way toward a goal, it's like the wedding photographer that had one great wedding. And then it's like, every wedding will be great. And they quit their job. You've pushed your way. When you're a pull person, what that means is you did weddings, hustled, portraits, until the opportunity got so big, you couldn't deny it anymore. Like you were missing out on stuff and you eventually had to say, it's pulling me, I have to go. And that's what I like.
It's all about the work, whether it's on the side or whether you're able to go in it full on. But what do those days look like? I remember the 5 a.m. club. Is that still going on or is that done?
No, that was with my last job. So no, I don't.
You don't wake up at 5 a.m. every day now that you.
No, a different season. I don't, when a marathon runner's done with the marathon, they don't go, well, got to run 26 miles tomorrow. Like, that would be dumb.
That would be. So what did those days look like back in the day when you were, hustling at 5 a.m.? Were you putting in a bunch of work before to make sure your goals were done? Were you fitting it around family time in the evenings? What's realistic for someone listening to this and wanting to pursue their dreams on the side?
Well, a big thing is, okay, you get up early. I always tell people most dreams, regardless of what the dream is, whether it's to lose weight, write a book, get a new job, the first thing they cost is time. Eventually they might cost money, but at first they cost time. And so you have to look at your calendar and go, where is their time? And at the time for me, I had 2 kids under the age of 4. I had a full-time job. I had part-time freelance work. I had a wife. I had a men's Bible study group. I had all these commitments. So the only time for me was 5 a.m. So I would get up and write before work. And then I'd practice speeches in the car, and then I'd do phone calls on the way home. And, there were things like that. So I think a big part of it is figuring out where do you have time you can work and then going from there.
That's some great advice about goals. And I know it's hard to give advice because it's much easier to sit down one-on-one with somebody and look at their schedule. You don't know where people are coming from, but really what I heard there was hone in on where you currently are. You said it before, people try to pursue their dreams in the midst of having kids lower than the age 4 and wonder why their dreams aren't working. And you tell them your season that you're in, you need to be a parent right now, something to that effect.
Yeah, it's like hustle has seasons. So for me, I'll meet young moms especially because, there's so many fun opportunities for moms these days to where like, it's not, okay, I have to be a mom or I have to have a full-time job. And those are my only options. You have 1,000 options, but I'll meet moms that go, I'm not working on my dream hard enough. And I'll say, well, tell me about your family. And they'll say, well, I have two twin 6-month-olds and a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I'll say, oh my gosh, what do you mean? Like, you're raising humans right now. And so
Right.
I think we need to give ourselves the grace to know, okay, this isn't the season for this, and that's not failure. I'm in a certain season, and that's fine.
And, this kind of underlying all of this is the idea of perfectionism, which you talk quite a bit about in your new book, Finish, which we'll jump into now. And that quote you said earlier, 92% of resolutions fail. But a quote that really stuck out to me in the book says, when we create a goal, we aim for something better. We want to look better. We want to feel better. We want to be better. But then better turns into best. And we don't want small growth. We want massive overnight success, which we've already talked about. But in your opinion, this will get into the kind of the idea of finish here. But how do we beat the plague of perfectionism? It's the thing so many people deal with. They cling to even. How do we beat it?
Well, I mean, it's a bunch of things. One is, the first chapter of the book talks about the day after perfect. So most goals quit the day after perfect. So you had a streak, you ate well 5 days in a row, or you read a book 5 days in a row, or you ran consistently and then you miss a day and the whole thing falls apart. So part of it is not grading yourself on a scale of 0 or 100. Like, I know a lot of perfectionists. This is always surprising to people. Real perfectionists, tend to have disgusting, messy cars. And you go, what? I thought they were anal and detailed. And no, that's not the truth. The reality is, if they can't clean it with a toothbrush level, they go, forget it. And it's just a wreck. And so, like, that's how it happens. And so with perfectionism, I know a lot of people that will go, I don't have time to make this perfect, so I'm not going to do it. Or they'll go, you know what? I've been running 5 miles a day, but I don't have time today, so I'm not going to run 3. I'll run 0 instead. And mathematically, you should be able to figure out running 3 is better than 0. That's a lot better. So a big part of beating perfectionism is not grading on a 0 or 100 scale, but instead going, if I got a 70, that's way better than 0.
Yeah.
It's dramatically better than 0. And I'm going to be good for that. And maybe I want a 72 next time. But this time was a 70, and I'm okay with that. A big part of it, though, is making sure your goal is the right size from the get-go. There are people that go, I'm going to write a book in a weekend. And you go, well, that's a terrible goal. Or I'm going to run a marathon. And you go, have you ever run a 5K before? Like, why can't you start with that? So I think that's a big part of it, is going, the goal is going to be the right size. Otherwise, you fail from the very start.
I was going to ask you that. I mean, how many times do you run into people who have maybe not the wrong goals, but unrealistic expectations? Would you say that's almost 90%? Or
I would say a lot of them. And part of it is that they think their goal should match their excitement. So what happens is you have this huge level of excitement and you think, my goal should match that level of excitement. And you go, like, no, it won't. Like, it's not supposed to. And that's not failure. Like, it won't. And so I think that's a big part of it. But yeah, I mean, part of what I did in Finish, or what I tried to do in Finish, was deal with the myths of goals. So when I say the myths, I mean the things we say, but we've never stopped to go, wait a second, what does that mean? Like, where did we believe that? Who says? And so one of them is, this idea of reach for the moon, because even if you fail, you'll land amongst the stars. And when you look at the psychology of it, it's just not true. Yeah. Most people, when they fail, don't go, I failed, but there's stars. They go, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I'll never do it again. So that was part of the goal of the book, was to attack and rewrite a bunch of the ideas that people just automatically believe without questioning.
That's so good. And I really felt that as I read it, that you were trying to break myths and that you're trying to communicate that, hey, the pressure's off, especially with the point you made about it's okay to be bad at something, which that goes back to perfectionism. But I kind of got the idea that you were saying that it's okay to be bad at something, and the fact that it's not necessarily an indication that one shouldn't pursue that goal. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, like, you should be bad at things you've never done.
Yeah.
Like, you should be terrible.
Right.
I just got a road bike recently. And so I've been riding with guys in the neighborhood, and I am consistently last. Like, they are so far ahead and so small in the distance. And it would be really dumb for me to be like, oh my gosh, why am I not good at cycling? Well, I'm not good at it because I've never done it. And the stamina is so different. And you go, still, I should be better. Like, no, I shouldn't. Like, I just honestly shouldn't. And so it would be foolish of me to say, okay, I should be great at this thing I've never done before. But that's what people do all the time. Again, that comes back to that being kind to yourself. Like, I'm going to cut myself some slack because the reality is I'm not going to be good at this thing. And that's okay.
Yeah. And so often it seems that when people are searching for purpose or calling and things are going badly, but they're trying new things, they might not feel like it's their calling or their purpose, but they don't realize that, hey, to find what you're meant to do, to find what you're meant to be, you have to try new things. That's just part of it. And on the other side of this, in the book, you also mentioned the fear of success, which is something that many people also deal with. And what does that look like?
Well, it can take a bunch of different shapes. So it could be you've got a weird relationship with money. Maybe your parents didn't have a lot of money and they used to, you'd go on family walks and they'd see some family that had a nice car or a nice whatever and would say, oh man, must be nice. Like, must be nice to have their easy life. And they would judge that family. My friend's mom used to say the only way they could have afforded that is if they're dealing drugs or doing something illegal. And he eventually had to say, Mom, that's not true. Like, we're in the suburbs, And so, I had a friend just the other day at a dinner party say to me, hey, that CEO makes $20 million a year. How do you think he sleeps at night? And I wanted to say probably on like Hungarian down pillows, like probably really well. And so sometimes fear of success is fear of money. Sometimes it's a fear of exposure. The more people that see me, the more people will judge me. And so it's a fear of exposure. Sometimes it's a fear of expectations. I have a friend who's really talented speaker, and she doesn't like when people start to enjoy her speeches because she's afraid that she'd rather surprise you and have low expectations than have high expectations and disappoint you. So when she starts getting successful, she starts getting nervous, like, they're going to expect that next time. And what if I'm not as good next time? So that's her fear. But yeah, it's one of those where if you don't struggle with it, you think it's the dumbest thing in the world. You're like, that's the whole point. Sometimes it's the fear of what do you do after the thing is over? Like, if you've spent all this time trying to get to this place, when they say it's lonely at the top, I think they just mean there's not another rung, and that's lonely. So, I mean, it can take a couple different shapes.
Yeah, that's really important. And the example you gave, too, of that artist that rips up her paintings right before she finished in the book, that was interesting. I mean, I kind of got from that idea of what's next can haunt you once you're finished with something, too.
Yeah, 100%.
That's such a big fear, for so many people. But what's next? But from your book, your new book, Finish, if there's one idea you want to leave people with, what would you leave them with?
I think I'd leave them with starting is fun, but the future belongs to finishers.
Boom.
I think finishing, and part of it is we live in a world of bottomless opportunities and endless distractions. So it's kind of like saying, hey, the world's water supply is about to end. If you own a lot of water, you'll be a very valuable, rich person. So, we live in a world where less and less people finish. So guess what? If you finish, you're rare and will make a lot of money and have a really happy, fulfilled life. Like, that's how I look at it.
Perfect. Next, I have a question from a listener that comes in from Rick Tooley. He asks, what was different about writing this book compared to all the others?
Well, I think the biggest thing was that it was research-based. Mm-hmm. When every other book I've written has been really kind of life-based. And this was the first one that I said, in addition to life stories, because there's plenty of those in the book, I want to make sure that I have hardcore research that speaks to what I believe. And so that's what I did, and so working with a researcher to really, because again, like now I have the joy of if somebody says, hey, I disagree, I get to go, well, show me your research. It's kind of like, I was thinking today, one of the best ways to end an argument is to say, well, tell me the last book you read about that topic. And if they haven't read a book about that topic, you're arguing with an idiot. Like, I'd much rather be in, I say God bless the outraged and informed, and God fear the outraged and ignorant. And I fear that's where we're headed.
Wow. There's a lot in that to think about.
Yeah, it's like I just got this new book. I think it's called The New Jim Crow. And it's about like the prison industrial system and how kind of unfair it is to African Americans. And an African American pastor recommended it to me. So my hope is not that I'll be an expert on that, but at least I'll know more. Like I might already be like, oh, I can't believe that, but I'm just reacting to Twitter or like a news clip. How much more informed will I be reading this book by an expert to say, oh, wow, I really see where that's a harmful thing. So that's kind of what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. I'm looking at your Instagram feed too. You read a lot of books. I mean, is that speaking to more what you were just talking about, getting to know more things? I'm just wondering, as a writer, this is your 6th book, right?
Yep.
After writing 6 books, is there ever a fear that comes along that you'll run out of things to write about, or no?
I mean, I don't know that I'll always write books, you know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, you know, maybe I'll be an author that writes forever, but I don't think so. I mean, because to not be able to write a book means that I've run out of curiosity.
Okay.
And I don't think I'll run out. I mean, my hope is I won't run out of curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good
So,
point.
you know, that's kind of now, I mean, will I be able to be published forever? That's a different question. That's not necessarily just up to me.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, will I always be curious? I hope so.
Yeah. And that, what you just said right there, to talk about the state of where the publishing industry is, that could be a whole 30-minute hour conversation. So I won't go down that rabbit trail, but that could lead to some interesting conversation for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So saying that you've written 6 books too, for my own curiosity, and maybe I know there's others out there listening who thought about writing books, or maybe they've already written some. Is there a system that you follow as you write books? After writing 6, is there some sort of system that you found makes it easier to write books, or is it the same things you deal with as you were writing book number 1?
No, I mean, I don't think there's a system. I think there's patterns.
Okay.
I think, you know, okay, my pattern is find a question I'm curious about that I'm willing to spend 2 years answering. Okay. So question, why, like, what does it take to finish? That's a great question. It's rich, it's layered, like I can deal with that. So you find the question and then you collect ideas in some sort of folder. I use Evernote. And then you start to see the patterns in the ideas, and then you start to arrange the ideas, and then you come up with an outline, and then you write the outline, and then you kind of put all the ideas up on a wall. So I have things I consistently do, but I wouldn't say it's a system. I think often writers want a system because then they think the writing won't be hard, like that the system will save them from like it being miserable, and that's not true.
So we've run from the beginning to the end here. I want to kind of wrap it up, but I have to ask you a question too on all this, starting with Stuff Christians Like, which was a huge blog you wrote on at first. And now it seems like, I mean, you were always focused on social media along the way, but it seems much more now. Maybe it seems like you're shifting your blog. You've got different newsletters going on for different groups of people. You're trying to grow an email list. But where do you think the blog fits in today's social media landscape, if you will? Does it just depend on the person and what their strengths are, or do you see a shift happening right now?
I don't know. I don't think a blog is as important. I mean, I think they're good. Don't get me wrong. I just don't know. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do. For me, what I'm really enjoying is, well, like for one, commenting kind of went away.
Yeah.
Like a bunch of big bloggers commenting went away. So if you don't have comments, you go, okay, well, what's another way I can reach people? And I feel like email is such a great way to reach someone. So basically what I did, instead of writing a bunch on my blog, because when you have people sign up for your blog, it's so generalized unless you're a niche. If you're like, I write about sewing and every day it's sewing, then that's specific. But like usually when you have a blog, it's pretty generalized. And so what I said was, what if I asked the people, my readers, hey, what do you care about? What do you need? How can I serve you? And I asked them to raise their hand when I said, hey, who's a writer? And then they raise their hands. And I said, hey, who's a speaker? And then those people raise their hands. Or hey, who's a parent or into health or whatever. So all these people raise their hand. I create email lists for them. And then I can write super specific, super nerdy content directly at them that they'll go, yeah, that's totally what I'm about. Mm-hmm. And so I went from having 18% open rate on my general emails to 50 to 70% open rate, which is unheard of.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so like for me doing that, and then you have their email address and can communicate with them. And so I don't know. if you asked me what's one thing about Finish, if you said what's one thing you wish you had done 10 years ago, I wish I had invested most of my time into email. I think social media is sexier, but email matters so much more.
I'm stealing that idea, John. That's such a good idea. Wow. 50 to 70%. That is unheard of.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. So.
And that's a perfect segue into my last question, talking about your newsletters. Where can people find your work, John?
I mean, the easiest place is acuff.me. But like when somebody goes, okay, if somebody's an entrepreneur, if you go to acuff.me/business, I'm a big like slash guy. So like acuff.me/business or acuff.me/speakers or acuff.me/writers or acuff.me/read. I really try to have a bunch of different ways for people to connect. But yeah, if you're an entrepreneur, like check out the acuff.me/business. All I do, it's just one idea a week, and I try to make it a really valuable, helpful idea that you'd actually go, okay, wow, this is helpful, And so like being a writer, I've got idea number 45 already. So I usually try to write a couple months out at a time. So like if you're a writer, idea 45 is how it's humbling when somebody meets you. Because what happens is you meet somebody and they go, what do you do? And you go, oh, I write books. Or if they say, what are you passionate about? You go, oh, I write books. They immediately say, hey, what's a book you've written that I might have heard of? Which is them saying, name your most successful thing and I'll tell you if I agree. And like, that's super humbling. Yeah. And it only happens to writers or musicians because nobody meets a lawyer and says, name your most successful case and I'll tell you if I've heard of it. Like that'd be so weird. But that's what we do to writers all the time.
Yeah.
And so again, if you're in one of those kind of audiences, it's helpful to go, oh, this guy, like, that is such a weird thing. I know exactly what he's talking about. And I thought it was just me, but it's not just me. Great.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, folks, the website is acuff.me. The book is finished. You'll want to go pick up a copy as soon as you listen to this episode. Awesome, John. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was fun, man. I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of these ideas. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.